Hello and welcome to the Coaching Podcast, coaching for success in sport and business. Your host is Emma Doyle, the energy and high performance under pressure coach who is a world leader in unleashing human potential. Buckle up for this high octane session. Let them have it, coach.
G'day everybody and welcome to the Coaching Podcast. Today I'm here with Cody Royle, coach of head coaches. Welcome to the show, Cody. How are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, we had to throw that in straight away because he does hail from Melbourne, Australia, even though I'm sitting in Denver, Colorado, and he is in Toronto, Canada. Now, Cody coaches head coaches in elite sport. So after a decade of coaching Canada's men's AFL national team, he now mentors a dozen head coaches across professional sports like soccer, basketball, rugby league, rugby union, ice hockey, and Australian footy. The reason he's on the show is because Nicole Pratt, shout out to Nicole Pratt, who's an exceptional tennis coach. Her and I spent January on a bit of a road show about my book around Australia. And she pulled out this book called Second Set of Eyes. Now, while Cody's written 3 books, this was the book that intrigued me and I got my hands on it and thought, okay, this is a concept that I've loved for a long time in my life. So before I ask you about that, I always do a pattern break question. So I'm going to ask you about your favorite coffee. Is it flat white? Are you a latte? Are you sugar, no sugar?
So you know what? I'm still, as a Melburnian, a massive coffee snob, which, as you know, in North America, it can go either way. But I recently got introduced to a cortado. Ooh. And so it's basically a mini latte. But yeah, I'd never heard of it before. I think it has a different name in Australia, but I've started drinking cortados religiously. So I guess the answer is mini latte. But yeah, I can do latte flat white, name it. Just a shot of espresso and some froth milk, and I'm good.
Good to go. Perfect. So a second set of eyes. I want to go there immediately because it reminds me of when I was 23 and I came to Florida because I wanted to learn from the best tennis coaches in the world. And somebody said to me, Emma, you need to learn the look. You need to also stand on the court and see what they see. And I want to just kick it off with you talking about that book because that's the reason you're on the show. And Praddy's an exceptional coach. So I love this concept of having a second set of eyes. So tell me, why'd you write the book? Tell me, just go with the title because I love the title.
Well, I guess I owe Praddy a huge thank you. I wasn't aware of that. And that fills my heart with joy to hear not only that someone like that I grew up watching play, kind of found my work somehow, but also recommended it to you. So let me just start there. But I don't want to give anyone the impression that I arrived here by design. I arrived here off the back of the book before Second Set of Eyes, which was called The Tough Stuff. And that was about the emotional toll of head coaching. And I had gone through a situation where, as the national team head coach, we had a player take his own life. And after, 10 or 12 years of coaching, I'd been in the AFL system. At home, I'd come over here. I was coaching the national team. I thought I knew everything there was to know about coaching. And then this arrived and I had to try to understand and unpack not only my own emotions, but how to lead 50 young men through the grieving process. And no resources, no help, didn't know where to go, looked endlessly online for anything that was talking about this. And I ended up writing a book about it. They say you write the books or you create what you need to consume. And by virtue of doing that, I started getting approached. I started getting DMs almost daily from other head coaches, I've never seen my lived experience represented in this way. Can you help me with some of the things that you wrote about? Because it's about identity, and it's about kind of the struggle and the daily struggles and your own sense of self, and some quite deep human constructs. And so it kind of felt like this divine intervention in my life to go and start to coach other coaches. And then it's a long introduction to get to where the name came from. Was I actually hated everyone else's names. So, I've been called a coach developer, a well-being coach, life coach, all these things. I'm none of those. I'm just a coach. I've been a coach since I was 23. And I use all of the same stuff that I used with my teams that I learned through coaching AFL. And I haven't really changed any of that. And so I don't want to use all those terms. I'm not a life coach. And so I ended up arriving at this, second set of eyes. And it sounds like a great title for a book. So, we went ahead and used it. I ran it by my editor, and he's like, well, it needs to be called that. And so really the task was to really introduce it from a sporting perspective, because as you well know, Emma, no one needs to introduce it to CEOs and executives being coached and the value of being coached. But oddly, despite the fact that we are coaches professionally and we sell coaching and the virtues of coaching every day in sport, we're the ones that don't use coaching to our own advantage, or that being coached. And so, that was the follow-up book, was the kind of work that I was doing, but also a bit of a sales pitch as to why coaches should really consider having a second set of eyes.
Well, thank you for sharing that so vulnerable and honestly from the get-go. I totally agree. I think as coaches, we also put up a facade. We put up a front, and sometimes we have to, because we're in front of a group of people or a group of players that we've got our shit together. And I laugh because I can think of numerous times over my career where I've had to pull my car over and pull myself together before I go out in front of a group of people to be able to perform my job. So that's one part of it, the whole mental health side, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute. But could you take me through the importance of choosing somebody to be that second set of eyes?
I think, and I make this case in the book, there's research behind this, that great decision-making is rooted in, when you take it outside the individual, right? There's plenty of research into individual decision-making and how to improve that. But further than that, neuroscience is starting to prove out that decision-making in pairs is substantially better, which just on the face of it kind of makes sense, right? However, those pairs need to have equal-ish experience in what they're judging, what decision they're making, and then also be able to verbalize their confidence that that thing is going to come true. And so along those lines, my belief is that it should be a coach that coaches you as a coach. Just like I would make the argument that it would be very helpful to have been a CEO or an executive to coach, or to be a general in the army to coach in that realm. It's not to say that other people can't do it, but I'm just saying the optimum version of it is for a head coach in team invasion sports to coach other head coaches in team invasion sports, or a head coach in tennis to coach another, because you can confidently look at a situation, a dynamic with a player, or the dynamics between a doubles pairing, or the mentality of players when they haven't been able to maybe overcome an opponent or play on the road or play on clay, or you can kind of look at that and confidently tell how, a course of training or a new travel schedule or something might actually impact that player. And that's where the real value comes from the second set of eyes, in that you can sit down together and bounce around the plan of what you want to do, and actually have some confidence in terms of what you're going to suggest as the intervention in the end.
Talk to me about that process a little. Let's go a little deeper there. I want to talk to you about intuition, because my intuition is telling me there's something around when you have that second set of eyes. If I think of all my great mentors and people that have worked with me over the years, they never just come in and tell me what to do, or they say, you're doing it wrong, you need to do it this way. What are your thoughts around that concept of coaching through your intuition?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that. And again, I took a little bit of a risk writing a chapter about intuition in Second Set of Eyes. So I guess I'll start with, I was raised by my mother to understand my intuition. So my bias is towards the strength of the intuition being our best decision-making platform. And I think, again, science is kind of starting to prove that out slowly, but people are coming around to intuition as a rapid decision-making platform for us as individuals. But along those lines I agree with you in that it's really, coaching isn't about coming in and saying you need to do this or you've done that wrong. I actually don't believe there's really even good or bad coaching outside of safety and ethics. There's no rules, right? So you're going to come up with a strategy to try to achieve this goal, and I'm going to come up with a strategy to achieve that same goal. However we go about it, ultimately the game decides. And so how we want to go about it, there isn't really good or bad per se. But what we can do is we can challenge things like intuition. Like, well, what does your gut say about what you've just told me, about the decision that you've made? How did you feel after you said that? Like, talk to me about, you said that you had said that, quite harshly to that athlete or to that player. How did it feel? What did your gut say, your intuition say about the way that you spoke to the athlete? And then what are the ramifications of that? And so you can actually check and challenge the intuition, just like you check and challenge decisions, just like you check and challenge the structure of your training program. And so, some really smart coaches are starting to do that, where they'll talk about it. For instance, one of the examples in the book is about the All Blacks, and that they actually spoke through intuition in their post-game debrief around the head coach. When did you have an intuitive feel about something but not act? And what were the ramifications of not acting? When did you go with your gut over maybe some other information, and what were the ramifications of that? And so, again, all those pieces really fit together, but it's got to be against this idea of, we're not coming in judgmentally and saying there's right or wrong. We're coming in to kind of ask questions about the way something was done or is about to be done, or how we can use the intuition, to the best of our ability.
I mentor this young coach at the moment who actually, right before this interview, just sent me a message, and he's got some different generations coaching. So some older generational coaches and some new coaches. And we were talking about this concept of flip it. So using the intuition to say, all right, old school coaches, you've got to coach in this new gamification strategy way. And then the young coaches, you've got to do like basic 2-on-1 drills and back to the old, or almost Harry Hopman style of training. And what an amazing experience for him to run this workshop around that. So I'm curious to know, you've said there's no one way to coach, which I agree with. And not but, and how can coaches that have been coaching, say, one way forever, like what's one, when you go into a club and you've got potentially people have been doing things a certain way forever, what's your first step in helping those coaches grow?
It's a little bit different to how I kind of do it. Like, I'm approached by individual head coaches who are interested in changing. Like, I get self-selectors, so I don't work with. I'm not, go into a club and try to change it, because I actually don't. I'm not that interested in that. The people that don't want to change. If you've been doing it this way forever and it's either still working or not working, it's kind of up to you to have that initial conversation with yourself, really, around whether you're interested in trying something else. But what I would say about quote unquote old school coaches is we need to be careful not to tar everyone with the same brush. And the reason I say that is just for fun, really. I've been releasing all my notes from all the autobiographies and everything that I've read from the quote unquote old school coaches. So I've gone back and I'm reading, basically, if you're coaching before 20 years ago, so 2004 backwards, Vince Lombardi and Bill Walsh and all these really famous names. And when you read their autobiographies, so their words about themselves and their thought process, they were doing what we do, and they were intuitive and they were thoughtful and they were
Caring,
psychologically minded. And I mean, geez, like I'll talk tennis with you. I'm wearing a Stanford hat. I met Dick Gould and I sat for coffee with Dick and we had our lattes, and he's an old school coach. He was the most like psychologically minded, driven, thoughtful. I changed everything. I tried this. I tried having a captain on Stanford. I tried not having a captain. I tried having an MVP. Then I didn't, so he went through all of the things. And so we can't just kind of say, because maybe they were brought up in the military era and they believed in that, which makes sense when you were in the military, that you would come out and say, this is a good way to perform.
and lead. And
to structure everything and discipline and all of these. Anyone's worldview would be that if you had just come from that. But also there's these really forward-thinking ideas that are kind of sitting in there that they often write about in their autobiographies, and you can see how modern they were without all the science. They had come to a lot of the same conclusions that we have with the science without it.
Intuitively,
yeah. And so again, I wonder whether they are, just because we've all met one coach who won't change, I wonder whether that's actually the norm or not.
No, really great point. Obviously, we should never put anyone in a box. And David Parkham was my course coordinator, and I'm a Carlton girls from the age of 5 when I had to make a cushion in prep, and it was the only logo that I thought was the coolest thing ever. So my dad said, once you barrack for that team, you cannot change your mind. So I'm a Carlton girl no matter what. But he was lecturing to us, and of course, his veins popping out of his neck, and he's this passionate leader who then did a anonymous 360 on himself and discovered that he doesn't listen and doesn't have an open door policy, thinking he did. So he was so vulnerable in sharing with us as 18-year-old students at Deakin. I was like blown away by that. And on the surface, you wouldn't think that about him. So let's go there with regards to feedback and reflection on your coaching. What are your thoughts on that?
Ultimately, that's probably the main advantage to performance of a second set of eyes, is the ability to sit down with someone who's especially slightly removed, but regardless, with someone to actually gather feedback on your performance. And it's funny because what happens all the way through our lives, so as an athlete or a player, you have constant feedback from your coaches. As an assistant coach and a junior coach, either at a club or in your assistant coach in a footy club or whatever, you have constant feedback from the head coach on how you're going. And then you get to this role at the end and all your feedback disappears and all your kind of mentoring disappears and all the how am I doing kind of disappears. And so being able to kind of sit and work through and have someone reflect your performance back to you, I think is the greatest accelerator of any knowledge work, which is what coaches do. We're not out there with the athletes. We don't do athletic work or physical work. We do knowledge work. I think having someone to reflect that with and talk about your intuition, like we talk about decisions that were made, how you said things, when you said things, and actually say them out loud. I think that's the greatest accelerator that we have. And ironically, what we call that is coaching.
Mm. So in 1 to a maximum of 3 words, which is my book, what my book's all about, what do you think makes a great coach?
So I think it's a mixture of, I'll use the 3 words. So emotionally intelligent and mindful. So it's understanding the emotional intelligence, as far as I understand it, is understanding the psychological framework that is impacting that person, of which there are many alternatives, right? There's the culture they grew up in, there's their own self-talk, there's all sorts of different variations. Yep. But understanding that is a thing that is impacting the outcome that they're getting. And then also, I think about mindfulness not in the most recent kind of Western version of it, but in either the Eastern or Indigenous version of it, in that everything is connected, and being mindful of how one thing impacts another. So those would be my 3 words to describe really the base level of what makes a great coach. If you've got those 2 things, you're a hell of a way there before you even layer on the technical and the tactical kind of nous and knowledge of the game. If you understand those 2 things, other people and yourself and how we're connected to others, I think you've got a lot of things clocked.
So everything you've said so far on this interview, does that also apply for a manager in the workplace? I know your background was originally in corporate. What are your thoughts on that answer? Does that apply to a business coach as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you read either your book or, Michael Bungay Stanya's book, who's another one of us from back home, who lives here with me in Toronto, the coaching habit. And you see those themes come out around questioning, around being emotionally intelligent and understanding that it's a human being that you're talking to, and that is a human being actually driving the performance before a worker, and that, being mindful of how you show up in the office and how that impacts the team that are working either with you or for you. All of those things still apply.
Do you think it's possible for a head coach who lives and breathes their sport, their team, whatever it might be, do you think it's possible for them to have balance?
Not in the way it's currently conceptualized. I struggle with the work-life balance conversation in general. I think high achievement is never going to be balanced. There needs to be some kind of batshit crazy things going on, because to do something that's never been done before, you have to do things that have never been done before. And so by virtue of that, whether it's business or sport or any other endeavor, it can't be perfectly balanced in this nice seesaw. What it can be is more balanced. And I think that's potentially what I would campaign for, is there is a greater balance. It doesn't mean perfectly balanced, but it also doesn't mean completely, a tipping point at the other end of the spectrum, which is where we kind of currently are. We're so far down the other end of the spectrum that there's workaholism and I call it like chronic individualism, like taking all of the responsibility for yourself and thinking only your work is the best work and not trusting your team and all of these things. That's kind of, we've gone off the deep end that way. So it can be more balanced than that, but I don't think it'll ever be perfectly balanced. If you're striving for something, legitimately what we'll call like high achievement.
Yeah, Rick Charlesworth was on the podcast and he said, ask yourself what might seem unlikely and impossible, but if you did it, would make the greatest difference, or something along those lines, with regards to high performance. So, and I also think that we, as coaches, high performing coaches, also need to cycle a little bit more. Like we periodize an athlete's program, we need to almost periodize our own lives as well, which is not something that often happens. I know you're passionate about the well-being of coaches. Is that something that you work with the people that you work with?
Yeah, that's the main thing, and it's kind of where it starts. Again, it probably comes from having written a book about emotion. And so often that's where people are introduced to me. But also, I think it's the first thing that you can fix. It's like an obvious thing, right? And so we're never taught that. We're never taught how to structure our days to rest or to recover. But, when you actually kind of dig into it, like the primary coaching skills are awareness, communication, and decision-making. And, the thing that depletes them the most is stress and threats and physical depletion and overwork and lack of sleep. And so literally you're stripping away the reserves of your three primary skills. So it would be like going and asking a tennis player to run a marathon before playing round one at Wimbledon, like the night before. That's kind of what we're trying to do as coaches. And then you can even go further than that, is where well-being is compromised, your ability to empathize with other human beings is challenged, right? Your ability, any parent will be able to tell you that when you're tired, even though you're holding this thing that you love the most humanly possible, it becomes difficult to maintain empathy when they've been shouting at you or crying for 10 hours. And so, in fact, I would say it's impossible to maintain that empathy. Eventually, it reaches a breaking point. And so why would it be any different when you're tired and you're trying to empathize or relate or understand the humanity of another human being that you don't care about, like your child? Close, but not the same. Like, why would it be any different? And so, again, there's some things that we can kind of fix there around some easy wins, sleep and nutrition and things that, again, we know as coaches are beneficial because we pass them on to our athletes and say, you need to do this to perform your best. And then we just need to listen to ourselves or maybe our coach. That's something that they can challenge you on and say, okay, so you made some bad decisions this week. How have you been sleeping? How have you been eating?
Yep, absolutely. So what disruptive idea do you have that will change the way that we coach by 2030?
That coaches are going to have coaches.
Yeah,
coaches are going to have coaches. It's, I mean, you can already see not a mad scramble, but you can see very forward-thinking coaches and clubs and organizations looking at. It's kind of the one leftover thing that we haven't put the high performance lens over, really, coaching. We've done it a lot with our, I work in team sports. And so you look at soccer in England or the NFL or the NBA, like they've looked at their organizational structures and how the information flows and their money. They've looked at, the athletes, they've looked at travel, they've looked at sleep, they've looked at, and no one had really paid any attention to coaches, but you can start to see that everyone's gearing up, spending money, looking at different ways of making sure their coaches are able to perform. And so by 2030, you can imagine in the next kind of 5 to 6 years, I would suggest a lot of head coaches are going to have a coach either full-time with them, like a Pep Guardiola or like Eddie Jones has with Neil Craig, or certainly on call to talk through the challenges of the day or the week. But that's going to change the game, because that's a new leadership structure and a new coaching structure.
Yeah, and I think you're right in the fact that a CEO doesn't hesitate to have a executive coach.
They write books about it, and $1 Trillion Coach is a great example that I also use. That's a great book just in general. But I mean, you've got this guy, Bill Campbell, who's coaching Steve Jobs and Eric Schmidt at Google, so two competitors at the same time. We don't think twice about the fact that they have a coach. And in fact, in Silicon Valley, I don't even know if they would give you the job now if you didn't have a coach. I think they would probably make you have one. And certainly venture capital is more interested in it now as well. It's like, I'll give you the money, but I want you to make sure you're being coached. Otherwise, I'm not going to give you the money, basically. And so, again, you can start to see the wheels turning for a lot of people around leadership and performance, and making sure that those investments are able to perform, but also taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely. What about just your top 3 tips out there for coaches who do want to grow and get better? What would you suggest they do?
The first one would be turn the mirror on yourself. So whether you think I'm talking absolute crap and you don't believe in anything that I've said, what I would implore you to do is turn the mirror on yourself and just think through, would this be acceptable if it was an athlete of mine? So the way that I sleep, how much time I spend with my family, how I'm eating, how I'm able to just function in everyday life, what challenges I have, and turn that around and say, if you're not treating yourself similarly, then it warrants some more introspection as to why not. Because coaches are performers too, and the impact of coaching on athletes is so drastic that if you find something, the impact isn't just for you, it's also for your athlete, right? So a better version of you showing up to the court every day, of course it has a huge impact on your player. So that might actually be the difference between you winning the club championship or not, right? Is actually you just showing up in a way that you would want for your athletes. The second is, I think exploring some concepts like emotional intelligence or mindfulness. There's so many great courses now that you can do online, remotely, that you can, they're kind of, I would especially recommend the ones that are a little bit outside sport, just slightly different thinking about the world and the challenges that are going on. But yeah, anything in that realm around performance psychology, mindfulness, emotional intelligence, decision-making, I think is going to be beneficial. And we don't tend to put them in coach education or licensing. And so beefing up those areas is got to be beneficial. And then the third would be just to read widely. Again, it's a bit of a kick that I'm on at the moment, but the answers have already been written. Like we're talking about, we're at about 150 years of kind of professional sport. So roughly coaches have been writing about and learning and passing along messages for about 150 years. There's a decent body of knowledge there. So if you think your challenge is unique, whatever challenge you're running into, chances are it's not. And so, again, I think that also brings about a sense of community in coaching, in that one coach doesn't necessarily know more than the other, or they've just found different answers on their journey. And what I found is just reading books from the 1950s by coaches, there's so many answers for modern problems in that kind of book that it's just blown me away that we've just been sitting on this gold mine of lived experience and overlooking it because, again, maybe we think they're old school, or maybe we think it was different back then, or maybe we've just never realized that that person wrote a book. But yeah, how great to be able to have or be sitting on a gold mine of 100 years, even 50 years of lived experience from people doing what we're doing. You should go and explore that.
What a great reminder for us all to park our assumptions and stay in the present, be mindful with our emotional intelligence and our communication, decision-making and awareness by sticking the mirror in front of our face. Cody Royle, Emma Doyle. That's a bit of a ring there. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for being on the show.
Royle and Doyle, we should start our own podcast, a little side project.
Like we're not that busy already, you and I can tell already.
No, exactly.
It's so important to put the mirror up against yourself. And I appreciate your time and your insights. And everybody, thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating review on your podcast listening device. And don't forget to tell a fellow coach about the show. The ball is in your court to take action and enjoy your coaching.